I was standing in the hallway outside the banquet room at the Fairmont, adjusting the clasp on my necklace when Marta grabbed my arm. Not gently. She grabbed it the way you grab someone who's about to step in front of a car. "Don't go in yet," she whispered. Her voice was strange, tight. I turned to look at her. Marta has worked in my home for 11 years. She's the kind of woman who irons pillowcases and notices when you haven't eaten. She doesn't alarm easily. She doesn't grab. "What is it?" She glanced down the hall toward the service entrance, then back at me. "Your son and his wife. They're already inside. They came early." She paused. "They're talking to someone near the back bar. A man I don't recognize. Marta, it's a retirement party. There are going to be people I don't. Please." She said it quietly, but with a weight that stopped me. "Come with me. There's a side corridor behind the coat room. You can hear through the ventilation panel. I discovered it last spring when we hosted your sister's luncheon." She looked almost embarrassed about that detail. "I need you to hear what they're saying before you walk in there." I've thought about that moment many times since. What if I had said no? What if I had done what I wanted to do, which was shake her off gently, smooth my jacket, and walk into that room smiling? I didn't. I followed her. Let me go back a little because none of this will make sense without it. My name is Vivienne. No, wait. That's not right anymore. I keep trying to protect people who stopped deserving it. My name is Cecile Moreau-Boat. I'm 64 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Westmount, which is a neighborhood in Montreal that people from the rest of Canada like to make jokes about. Old money, they say. Quiet streets. Stone houses that have been standing longer than the country has been a province. My husband passed 8 years ago. Lung cancer, though he never smoked a day in his life. The cruelty of that still catches me sometimes, like a loose thread you don't notice until it snags. I have 2 children. My daughter lives in Halifax with her husband and their little girl, who is 5 and already opinionated in a way that makes me feel proud and slightly terrified. We talk every Sunday. She calls me Mommin and means it. My son. I'll call him my son because I still don't know what else to call him, is 38. He and his wife Chloe live 20 minutes from me in NDG. They have no children, which used to worry me, but I've stopped asking. They are very focused on other things. Money things, property things, the kind of conversations where everything is always about to happen, always just around the corner, always dependent on some investment coming through or some deal being finalized. He married Chloe 6 years ago. I tried. I genuinely tried. She is smart and she is organized and she can be, when she wants to be, very charming. At Christmas, she brings expensive wine and compliments my house in a way that sounds specific but lands slightly hollow, like she's done a walkthrough and assessed the value before she sat down to eat. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself a lot of things. The retirement party was for me. 31 years at a financial planning firm, the last 12 as a senior advisor. When I told them I was leaving in the spring, my colleague Renaud organized the dinner. He reserved the private room at the Fairmont. He sent out invitations on real cardstock with envelopes that had a proper texture to them. I wasn't expecting anything grand. I'm not someone who needs grand. But I had worked hard for a long time, and I thought I deserved one evening where I got to feel, without apology, that it had meant something. Marta came with me to help manage the logistics. She knew the room layout. She'd coordinated with the catering manager. She brought the centerpiece arrangements herself in her hatchback that morning. She was not a guest, exactly, but she was not invisible either. She moves through spaces the way competent people do, quietly and without ceremony, noticing everything. She had noticed my son and Chloe arrive 40 minutes before the event was scheduled to begin. She had noticed the man they were talking to. And she had heard enough to come find me in the hallway before I walked in and changed everything that was about to happen. The ventilation panel was behind a stack of folding coat racks in a narrow service corridor. Marta had to move 2 of them quietly, which she did with the focused efficiency of someone who has had to be quiet her whole life in rooms that weren't quite hers. I stood close to the wall. The voices came through clearly, not perfectly. There was a low hum of catering equipment somewhere nearby, but clearly enough. I recognized my son's voice immediately. She doesn't know anything about it, he was saying. She's never changed the documentation. I've asked, indirectly, and she defers it. She says there's no rush. A man's voice I didn't recognize. Calm, professional sounding. And the primary residence? You're certain that's still in her name alone? Yes, everything is. That's the issue. Chloe's voice, lower, but she'd always had that habit of hitting sharper when she was excited about something. The advisor we spoke with said that once she's no longer working, once there's that transition, people often, they get more agreeable. They don't want confrontation. They just want peace. I didn't breathe. The RRSP and the TFSA, the man said, and I understood then that this was some kind of financial or legal consultation happening at my retirement party at the bar 40 minutes before I was supposed to walk in and be celebrated. Those were transfer outside the estate if she's designated you as beneficiary. Has she confirmed that? She confirmed it verbally, my son said, years ago, when Dad died. Verbal confirmation doesn't, I know. That's why we're here. A pause, the sound of ice in a glass. She's not going to fight us, Chloe said. She's not that kind of person. Once we explain that it's about simplifying things, protecting her, making sure the transition is smooth, she'll agree. She always agrees. She wants everyone to be comfortable. She said it like it was a flaw, like my preference for peace was a door they'd already figured out how to open. I stood in that corridor for what felt like a long time but was probably 90 seconds. Marta had her hand on my arm again, but differently this time, not to stop me, to steady me. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Her expression said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But you needed to know. I nodded. Then I smoothed my jacket. I adjusted my necklace, and I walked back out into the hallway and stood there for a moment, looking at the door to the banquet room. Here's what I want you to understand. I did not cry. I didn't feel what I expected to feel, which was devastation. What I felt was something older and quieter than that, something that had maybe been waiting for a while to be confirmed. I thought about my son at 12, sick with the flu, and how he'd wanted me to read to him even though he was too old for it, and I'd read to him anyway, both of us pretending it was for some other reason. I thought about the way he used to call me on Sunday mornings, before Chloe, before the investment talk, before the versions of himself he kept trying on and discarding. And then I thought about what Chloe had just said. She wants everyone to be comfortable. She was right. I had, for a very long time, wanted everyone to be comfortable, including people who were, it turned out, not extending me the same courtesy. I took a breath. I went in. I smiled. I hugged people. I accepted a glass of wine from Renaud and listened to him give a toast that was generous and a little bit embarrassing and completely sincere. The room was warm. My colleagues were kind. There were people there I had not seen in years who had driven in from Laval and from the South Shore and from as far as Quebec City. My son and Chloe were at a table near the back. He came over when I arrived and kissed my cheek and said I looked wonderful. She came and took my hands and said this was so deserved, so long overdue, that I'd given so much of myself. I smiled at both of them. We should find time to sit down this week, my son said. Just the three of us. There are some things I want to go over with you about the estate planning, just to make sure everything is streamlined. Of course, I said. I'd love that. He looked relieved. He actually looked relieved. I excused myself to find the washroom. In the stall, I took out my phone and sent a message to my daughter in Halifax. Are you free to talk tomorrow morning? Not urgent, but important. Love you. She responded in 4 minutes. Always. Call whenever. Love you too, Maman. Then I sent a message to a woman named Sylvie Alio-Yarno. Sylvie is an estate lawyer. I have known her since we were both young mothers at the same school in Outremont, trading cold coffee and complaints about sleep deprivation. She is now one of the most respected estate and family law practitioners in Quebec, which is what happens when you combine intelligence with stubbornness and a complete absence of sentimentality. I had not spoken to Sylvie about my estate in several years. I had not felt any urgency. I wrote, I need an appointment as soon as you can manage, this week if possible. Things have shifted. She wrote back before the main course was served, Thursday at 2. I'll clear it. I did not confront my son at the party. I did not confront Shrale. I have been asked since by my daughter and by Sylvie and by Marta herself how I managed to sit through that dinner without saying something. I don't have a clean answer. I think part of it was that I was genuinely uncertain about what exactly I had heard. Legal conversations are not always sinister. People plan for transitions. People discuss estates. But I knew. Under the uncertainty, I knew. I had heard my son's voice saying she doesn't know anything about it. I had heard Chloe saying I would agree because I wanted peace. I had heard a stranger ask whether the beneficiary designations had been confirmed, and I had heard my son say, I know. That's why we're here. They were not planning for my benefit. They were planning for mine to be theirs. I went home that night, and Marta drove me because she had come with me and she lived nearby, and she always drove me home from evening events since my husband died. We didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Montreal at 11 o'clock is quiet in April, in a particular way. The snow is gone, but the trees aren't fully out yet, and the streets have that slightly provisional quality, like the city is waiting to see what the year is going to ask of it. Did you know before tonight? I finally asked. She was quiet for a moment. I had wondered, she said, the way he asked me, last year, whether you'd updated your will after the renovations. He said he was just curious. He said he wanted to make sure everything was organized. She kept her eyes on the road. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was reading it wrong. You weren't. She nodded. Marta, I said. Thank you. She made a small sound that was not quite a dismissal, but was very much in that direction. She is not someone who accepts gratitude easily. It embarrasses her, I think, not because she's modest, but because to her, what she did was simply what you do for someone you care about. It doesn't require thanks. It requires only that the person you care about doesn't get hurt. Thursday came. I walked into Sylvie's office on Sherbrooke Street and sat down in the chair across from her desk and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad in her fast, slanted handwriting. When I finished, she put down her pen and looked at me for a moment. Under Quebec civil law, she said, your son has no automatic claim to anything while you're alive and competent, which you are. I know. Your primary residence, your RRSPs, your TFSAs, your non-registered accounts, your pension income, all of it is yours to direct as you see fit. The beneficiary designations on your registered accounts, if they've never been changed from your husband's estate designations, may have defaulted to your estate, which would make them subject to your will. I haven't changed them since Michelle died. Then they're likely directed to your estate. Yes, which means they flow through whatever your will currently says. She looked at me steadily. What does your will currently say? Equal split between my son and my daughter. Sylvie nodded slowly. And is that still what you want? I thought about my son's voice in the corridor. She doesn't know anything about it. I thought about Chloe saying I would agree because I wanted peace. The way you describe a property that was easy to develop because the current occupant had low resistance. No, I said. It's not. We spent 2 hours in Sylvie's office that Thursday. When I left, I had made the following changes. The beneficiary designations on my RRSPs and TFSAs were updated to name my daughter directly, outside the estate, as Sylvie had recommended. My will was revised. The primary residence, the Westmount house that Michelle and I had bought when we were 31 and couldn't quite afford it and did it anyway because we loved the light in the kitchen, was placed into a trust, managed by Sylvie's firm. Structured so that I could live in it for the rest of my life and it could not be directed by anyone's pressure or persuasion during that time. My daughter received a larger share. My son received something because he is still my son and I am still his mother, and I have not been able to fully wall off that part of myself, nor do I think I should. But the distribution was no longer equal, and there were conditions. There was one other thing. I set up a separate testamentary gift. A specific bequest in legal language to Marta Kowalczyk-Beaumont, who has worked in my home for 11 years and has ironed my pillowcases and made sure I ate and driven me home through Montreal in April when the city was holding its breath. She does not know about it. I've not told her. I am telling you now because I want it said somewhere, even if only here. There are people in your life who will show up for you in the dark, in service corridors at the wrong moment, and they will do it not for what they'll receive, but because that is simply who they are. They deserve to be recognized. They deserve more than recognition. Marta will be taken care of. That is decided. I called my son the following Monday and invited him and Chloe to lunch. The restaurant I chose was a small French place in Plateau Mont-Royal that I have been going to for 20 years. Not fancy, not a statement, just familiar. Somewhere I felt like myself. They arrived together, both of them slightly overdressed for the neighborhood, which told me something about how they'd interpreted the invitation. We ordered. We made small talk about the retirement, about my plans, about whether I was going to travel. Chloe mentioned Portugal. My son mentioned that the exchange rate was favorable. After the main course arrived, my son said in his careful way that he'd been thinking about what he'd mentioned at the party. About sitting down and going over the estate documents. Just to have clarity, he said. Just so you're not carrying all of that alone. I put down my fork. I've already taken care of it, I said. He looked at me. Sorry. I met with Sylvie last week. My estate documents are updated. The beneficiary designations are updated. Everything is organized. I picked up my fork again. So you don't need to worry about that anymore. The silence that followed was not brief. Chloe recovered first. Oh, she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach. That's of course. That's great. We just wanted to make sure you weren't overwhelmed with everything. I'm not overwhelmed, I said pleasantly. I spent 31 years managing other people's financial planning. I'm quite comfortable with my own. My son was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, did you make any changes? I looked at him. I kept my face entirely neutral, which is something I learned in 31 years of client meetings and which has served me extremely well. Some adjustments, I said, to reflect my current situation and my priorities. I paused. Sylvie was very helpful. He didn't ask anything else. I think, on some level, he understood that the conversation he had been planning, the one where he explained to me gently, that it would be easier if things were simplified, streamlined, organized in his direction, was no longer available to him. The property he had been quietly surveying had already been surveyed by someone else, with a different result. We finished lunch. We talked about other things. I paid the bill because I always pay the bill, and because I wanted to, very clearly, be the one who paid the bill. It has been 4 months since the retirement party. My daughter came to visit in June with my granddaughter, and we spent a week doing almost nothing. Walking in the park, cooking together, watching the little one discover dandelions with the particular intensity that 5-year-olds bring to everything. It was the best week I have had in a long time. Maybe longer than I want to admit. My son and I are not estranged exactly. We talk, we have dinner occasionally. There is a version of our relationship that still exists, though it is quieter and more careful than it used to be, and I feel the shape of what it used to be sometimes, the way you feel the shape of a piece of furniture you've moved. The space where it was. I have not told him what I heard in the corridor. I have thought about it. I have thought about what I would say and how he would respond and whether it would produce anything useful. So far, the answer has been no. Maybe that changes. Maybe it doesn't. Chloe sent me a birthday card in July. It was a beautiful card, chosen with care. The message inside was warm and specific. I read it twice. I put it on my bookshelf because I am the kind of person who keeps things, even things I'm not sure what to do with. Marta came on a Tuesday 2 weeks ago, as she usually does. She cleaned and we had tea afterward, as we sometimes do when the afternoon is quiet and neither of us has anywhere to be. She told me about her nephew who was starting ZGEEP in the fall and was nervous about it. I told her about a book I'd been reading. We talked about whether the summer had been too hot, which it had been, or whether we were just getting less tolerant with age, which is also possible. At some point, she said, without preamble, "Are you all right? Since everything." I considered the question properly. "I think so," I said. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel worse than I do. But there's something almost clarifying about it. When someone shows you who they are, you don't have to keep guessing." She nodded. She understood that, I think, in a way that goes beyond this particular situation. "You were brave," I said. "In that corridor, you didn't have to do that." She made her dismissive sound again, the one that means she disagrees but doesn't want to argue. "Of course I did," she said. "You would have done the same." I thought about that after she left. Whether I would have had the courage to stop someone I cared about in a hallway and say, "Wait, there is something you need to know, and it is going to hurt, and I'm going to make you hear it anyway." I would like to think I would have. I genuinely would. But what I know for certain is this. I am 64 years old. I have spent a great deal of my life making sure other people were comfortable. And I know that something shifted in me that evening in April in a service corridor behind a coat room at the Fairmont, listening through a ventilation panel to the sound of people planning for my absence before I'd even arrived. I am still someone who wants peace. I don't think that changes. But I understand now that peace is something you build on honest ground, not something you maintain by pretending the ground is more solid than it is. My house is mine. My accounts are directed where I want them directed. My granddaughter is growing up knowing her grandmother is someone who paid attention, and Marta, when the time comes, will not be left wondering whether she mattered. She knows, I think, already, but she'll know for certain, and that part I'm completely at peace with. I've been thinking about what Marta said to me in the car that night, that she had wondered, that she hadn't said anything because she didn't know if she was reading it wrong. I understand that. I had been reading it wrong for years, or maybe not wrong exactly, but generously. There's a version of paying attention that looks like wisdom, but is actually just hope. You notice the small things that don't quite fit, and you arrange them into a shape that makes sense, a shape that allows everyone to stay at the table. I was very good at that. 31 years of sitting across from people and helping them plan for futures they couldn't quite see. I knew how to hold uncertainty without flinching. I thought that was a strength. I still think it is, mostly. But there is a point where generosity curdles into something that doesn't serve anyone, least of all yourself. I had been generous with my son for a long time. Generous with my interpretations of his questions, his interest in my finances, his careful mentions of estate simplification. I told myself he was being practical. I told myself I'd raised someone who thought ahead. I wanted that to be true. And wanting something to be true is not the same as it being true. I knew that professionally for decades and managed to forget it personally, which I suppose is how it usually goes. What I heard through that ventilation panel wasn't a revelation. That's the part that's hardest to explain. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like a door finally opening onto a room I had always known was there but had been choosing not to enter. Chloe's voice saying I would agree because I wanted peace. My son asking whether the beneficiary designations had been confirmed. A stranger with a calm professional voice asking about my primary residence like it was a file on a desk. None of that was a surprise. And that, I think, is the real lesson. Not what they said, but the fact that I wasn't surprised. We teach children that honesty matters. We teach them to be fair, to consider other people, to think beyond what they want in this moment. And then we hope the lesson takes. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And that failure belongs to the child, not to the teaching. You cannot build someone else's character for them. You can only build your own, and then try to make decisions that reflect it. What I could control was what I did next. I could walk into that room smiling, pretend I hadn't heard, and spend the rest of my life in the particular exhaustion of maintaining a peace that was never actually peaceful. Or I could be quiet, observe, and then act, clearly, deliberately, without drama, in a way that protected what I had built and honored what I actually valued. I chose the second thing. I went to Sylvie. I updated my documents. I made sure Marta would be taken care of. I had lunch with my son and told him calmly that everything was already organized, and I watched his face understand that the conversation he'd been planning was no longer available to him. That moment at the restaurant, his expression, the way the air shifted, I won't pretend I felt nothing. He is still my son. That doesn't go away. But there was something underneath the sadness that felt solid, like ground that had been uncertain for a long time and had finally settled. Intelligence without honesty is just strategy. Strength without integrity is just leverage. I have seen both of those things up close now, and I know which one I want to carry into whatever years I have left. Marta drove me home through Montreal in April, quiet and steady, and I thought, this is what loyalty actually looks like. Not the announced kind. The kind that shows up in service corridors and drives you home and irons your pillowcases, because that is simply what care does when it's real. She will be taken care of. That is already decided, and it is, without question, the right thing.